This is Eric Herman, my friend.
Hello.
He's curious about China. He seems to like to talk about China.
Yes, welcome to our series, What Do You Know About China? This is the first part in a multi-part series. And this is aimed at American and English-speaking audiences who wish to know more about the country of China. And what better person to have to speak with than David Xie, who is born and raised in China. He was a former professor of economics at Peking University, which is often considered the Harvard of China. He's a public intellectual and a frequent speaker on issues related to China. And so we would like to talk sort of informally today about some basic questions about China and find out what we know. So first of all, David, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from in China, and how long you've been also in the United States.
Okay, I was born in Wuhu, a city along Yangtze River, which was a city of Anhui province. Many foreigners know the Huangshan Yellow Mountain. It's very famous scenic spot. In China, we have seen why you come back from 5 top mountains in China. You won't see other mountains. But why you come back from Yellow Mountain, that means you don't have to see other mountains.
It's that beautiful.
Yeah. So when I was 4 years old, actually my father and my mom transferred to another sport to work for a company which was very important for Navy. Mm-hmm. It's not a shipyard, it's mainly for engine for the Navy, which was located in Shanxi province, near Xi'an. It's about, I would say, like 50 kilometers away from Xi'an.
Ah, I see.
That part, and also very famous spot at about Yang Guifei, the tomb of the concubine of the emperors. That's called Guifei Yang. And also other emperors or empress tombs nearby. So that's very famous ancient scenic sport, and there's a lot of relics, historical relics.
Is that right?
So basically I was raised up there in that place since from time to time I come back to southern part, and I lived with my grandparents in Shanghai for some time.
Shanghai.
And then I returned to Shanxi to attend the primary school and then high school.
So now China is a very large country, and some people might not know this. It's actually geographically about the same size as the United States. So it's a humongous country. So the area that you were born in, what part of the country was that? Was that sort of in the middle?
I would say that's, the map of China looks like a hen or maybe cock. I mean the rooster.
Oh, rooster, sure.
Rooster,
yes.
Yeah. So I would say that part of Anhui looked like a stomach part of the rooster. So that's southeast part of China.
Southeast. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very developed area with paddy rice and fish. So we call that like a hometown or home village of the fishing or paddy rice. In ancient time, not everybody is suitable for human's life, but that part is quite, comparatively speaking, is flourished.
Right. So now geographically, China is a very diverse country as well. I mean, I think it's a bit like the United States. You've got mountains, you've got great rivers, you've got coastal lines with the ocean, you've got forests, you've got deserts. So could you talk a little bit about the geography and the topography of China?
Okay, in general, very simple. Put it simply as western part is higher than the eastern part. So we call it 西高东低. That means the western part mainly are mountains or plateaus. For the eastern part, coastal areas or river delta. So it looks much lower in topography, and also it's more developed and more flourished with a more densely located population.
Right. Well, so that's another interesting question. China is famous for its very large population. Tell us approximately how many people live in China and where they're dispersed throughout the country.
Okay, I think according to recent census, it could be like 1.37 billion.
Wow.
There's an estimation of the overseas Chinese, at least 80, I would say 80 million or something. Maybe some people would say yes or less, but in US alone, Chinese in US is 5 million.
Right. So China has a large diaspora of residents who have moved to other countries around the world. As you said, at least 80 million and 5 million Chinese living in the United States alone. And comparing the numbers, population to the United States, here we have about 325 million, I think, is the latest census number. So putting that into perspective, 1.37 billion is a huge number. Now, are they dispersed evenly throughout the country, or are they located in particular regions?
They're more concentrated in southern part of China or eastern part of China. Like in those southern provinces like Zhejiang, Jiangsu, Anhui, and Guangdong, Yunnan, and more. Nowadays, those industrial cities, they have the more population. So just giving you an idea as like, a city, if it's over 1 million, it's not big in China.
Right.
Yeah, we at least have 50, at least 50 cities more than 1 million population.
Right. Which is incredible. I mean, I think the United States has something like 20 cities with 1 million or more people. You have 50, or I've even heard as high as 100, and growing rapidly.
Yeah.
But this is a relatively new thing for China, if I understand correctly. Going back 30 or 40 years ago, China was still very much an agricultural, rural society. And in recent decades, there's been this urbanization, and these large cities have sprung up pretty quickly.
Some of the old cities were developed by the foreign adventurers, like Shanghai.
Shanghai, right?
100 years ago, Shanghai is only a small fishing village. When some Western adventurers came, they have the gambling, the place, they have the horse race, and they have a lot of investments.
Yes.
And by Shanghai became the number one, the big city in China. Not only population, but also its production of the GDP,
Yes.
GDP on other products.
Yes.
So I would say some new cities like Shenzhen.
Shenzhen in the south.
Yeah, started only, I think before 1980.
Yes.
So just say as called a special economic zone. So
Yeah.
only more than 30, less than 40 years developments.
Right.
Big city.
Yeah, I've seen some, if you look this up on the internet, you can look at pictures of Shenzhen in the early 1980s, and it's really just a few small villages, and now it's this enormous metropolis, bigger than really any city in the United States. It's quite remarkable. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the great cities in China, some of the most important cities? You mentioned Shanghai, and sort of what they're known for.
Yeah, normally we just mention 北上广深. Bei is Beijing, Shang Shanghai, Guang Guangzhou, or some people call Canton, Shen Shenzhen, and then some other big cities like Nanjing, old name is Nanking, right?
Right.
And also Xi'an, Wuhan, Shenyang, some like big cities, not originally big, but now it's became much more bigger. It's Suzhou and Wuxi, even Changzhou. Many cities, new cities. Dongguan. Before the reform, it's only a small town.
Yes.
Now Dongguan now is a big city.
Right.
and also Zhongshan, some other cities. Guangdong province.
Chongqing, of course.
Chongqing is an
west.
old big city,
older
but
city,
now it's
yeah.
much larger with the population, since it became what we call the direct jurisdiction under the central government.
I see.
Yeah.
Now, and tell us a little bit about Beijing, because that's obviously a really important city in China.
Beijing is an ancient city started in, originally from the Yuan dynasty, which is about AD 1000, something like that. And then within less than 1,000 years, you could see they're developed so differently. But before 1949, people consider Beijing as a major ancient capital or ancient city with a lot of cultural, the historic relics.
Yes.
But it doesn't show its importance in industrial development or some other way. But after 1949, the capital chose Beijing, not only capital, but also kind of the focus of the industrialization.
Right.
So like the former leader Chairman Mao, he preferred to have seen the factory's chimney. You know, when the chimney got a lot of smoke, I think it's a good sign for industrialization.
Right.
So he told people, say, as far as we can see many chimneys smoking, smoking.
That's a good sign.
That's a good sign for our socialist industrialization. So you understand that in the meantime, it means very serious pollution in downtown Beijing.
Yes, well, that's another issue that's very much been in the news that we've been reading about here in the United States, is that there's real pollution issues in China, environmental concerns. What is the situation in that regard, and what is the Chinese government doing to help improve the situation?
Nowadays, people can see or can feel the very serious smog in Beijing. So in winter time especially, it's very serious. When people go outside, they have to wear mask or whatever they can do, and they avoid the heavy pollution, especially for the little children.
Yes.
It is said in China, the top leaders, they have all kind of a special treatment of the food, the water, anything, and they have the special supply.
Right.
But only one thing they cannot do the special supply. That's the air.
The air.
But still, they can use the filter machine to filter the bad air. But that won't last for long, I would think.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, the water supply is an issue as well. I remember reading a famous story, I think it was from around 2012, where a couple hundred pigs in Shanghai floated down the river into the city. So there's some real environmental concerns as China becomes this great industrial power. Now, that's another thing I wanted to touch on. In the news, we hear a lot about China as this growing economic power and rival to the United States. Tell us a little bit about that. It's really grown as a manufacturing power and economic power in the world.
Yeah, given the population and huge demand from the daily consumption, China's economy goes fast. That's true. Yet, just remember the fact, before 1978, Communist Party controlled all the kinds of the resources. People cannot have a free market economy. That means people depends on the national supply of food or everything. Rational, they have quotas, they have coupons. Without coupon, you could not purchase any food or any necessities in China. So that was a very bad situation. It's just compare with North Korea. It's almost no better than what they have in North Korea nowadays. So after 1978, people tried to have the kind of economic reform, especially given the leader Deng Xiaoping at that time. So when people got some privilege or they have some opportunity to develop their own economic activities, then China get to much faster development. Then, but with the cost, with the very high cost of the social, some afterwards No, I mean I would say
repercussions.
The side effects.
Yes.
Side effects like heavy pollution, unsafe food supply, and some bad or even fake medicines.
Oh, you're right.
Medications. People when they have some medical treatments, they got even worse results. So the poor education. It doesn't mean they don't have a beautiful campus. They have many high buildings in campus campus. But the content of education is a communism or a it's actually ideological control over many issues.
Yes. Well, let's talk a little bit about the government of China, because that's something that might be somewhat hazy and unfamiliar to many American or English-speaking audiences. So China is a communist government, but it's also a capitalist country. How do you square those two differences?
Well, I would not call it certainly not a capitalist country. If you say part of the or partial market economy, you would call it as a capitalist economy. But Deng Xiaoping said, we can take whatever the means of production or the market form to be utilized in China. It doesn't mean that it should necessarily call it as capitalist one, but we call it a socialist market economy. Especially after 1992, when Deng Xiaoping has South tour, he gave the famous speech and let people develop faster. So only limited, very limited market economy. It's not a full, I call it a quasi-market economy.
I see.
Because still they have the central planning. They have a central planning system. And also the most important thing, the resources they will control. Because in China, the land is a national owned, not private.
Right.
Natural resources like oil, coal, any the ores like iron ores, other ores, they're all controlled by China.
Right. By the state.
By the government.
Yes. Right. Okay. Now, and China's become this enormous manufacturing power with huge economies of scale, and we're familiar with a lot of our products. They say made in China when we look at our shirts, but it's much more than simple things like clothes and textiles and toys. It's also high-tech stuff that are being manufactured in China now as well, like phones and computers.
Yeah. At the initial stage, it's more labor-oriented products. That means since China has a much lower labor cost, so they have kind of advantage or comparative advantage in competition. But nowadays, it's getting less and less advantage on this field. So it should be more technology or high-tech oriented products.
Right.
Yet, China doesn't have much, the patents. Doesn't much of the what we call the original inventions.
Right, the intellectual property.
We only have some kind of innovation based on the other people's the foreign patents.
Right.
So that's a lot of copy and what do you call the emulation. So by and by, China gets some development or progress.
Right.
But it doesn't mean China is a very strong competitor in the world economy.
Right. Sure. So let's talk a little bit more about the Chinese people and what their lives are like. So, first of all, one of the things that's interesting to me as an American is that here in the United States, pretty much everybody who was born in this country speaks English. We all speak a common English language. Of course, we have many immigrants who speak other languages as well. In China, however, there are several different Chinese languages or dialects that are actually quite different from one another. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about some of the language differences in China.
Well, I would not say it's several different languages. I would say we have 56 nationalities altogether. That means besides Han is the most populated, the biggest one with a huge population. Then we have 55 minorities,
right,
including Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongolians, and other minorities. So each minority they have they have their own language and even written language for some. Some national minorities don't have the written language, but later on people develop them something substitution.
Right.
They learn the Mandarin Chinese. So even with among Han people use Mandarin as a official language, they still have too many dialects.
Right.
Hundreds of them.
Hundreds
of them. Even in some of the place from village to village, people can not fully understand each other.
Right. Well, my understanding is in a place like Shanghai, a major international business center, of course people speak Mandarin there, but there's also a local dialect of Shanghaiese that is almost indecipherable from Mandarin and mutually unintelligible.
But even in Shanghai, people can figure out which part of Shanghai you speak because of different tones.
Right.
Pudong, Puxi, and some the Xuhui district or Zabei district, they can judge.
Right. That's
so
amazing.
That means that they have kind of discrimination among different levels or different classes. People think that in some area people got more rich, the other poor area. So when they speak different tones, people seems they come from that part. That's kind of discrimination. And also when we say dialects, as I mentioned, in Anhui province, there's a place called Huizhou. Very special, as a lot of mountain areas. So from one village, if there's a mountain, if they have to climb mountain to other village, then they cannot fully understand the other village.
That's fascinating.
So that's a lot of the different dialects.
And then, of course, there's two big, broad categories of language in China as well. There's Mandarin and Cantonese. Can you talk sort of broadly about those and where those are regionally located?
Well, Cantonese, of course, when they speak official languages, 客家话. In Guangdong province, most people can understand that Cantonese.
Right, in the south.
But still they have minor branches like Shantou, Shanwei. When people speak Chaoshanhua, that means Chaozhou and Shantou. That's so difficult. Even for the official Guangdong official language, it's not the same.
I see.
So it's more difficult. But now it's good thing is the people, they should understand Mandarin. They should learn to speak Mandarin.
Now, is it true that in school Chinese children all study Mandarin, and do they also study English?
That's compulsory.
It's compulsory.
Compulsory language or courses. For all educated people, at least they can understand Mandarin. They might not speak that perfect or very accurate without accent. That's not easy. It's much more easier for the northern part of China to the southern part of China.
Since Mandarin is based on the Beijing northern dialect.
Yes, that's true.
Now, Chinese school children also learn English, if I'm correct.
Yeah, from many cities from the third grade. That means around, because people nowadays go to school since 6, so it could be when 9 years or even 8 years old they started English learning.
Right. And so is it the case that younger people in China tend to be more fluent in English than some of the older generations who maybe didn't learn it as much when they were in school?
Yeah, in 1950s and 60s, people were required to learn Russian at that time.
Oh, really?
Because Russian was more friendly at that time. So only those people who go to school before 1949, they got the opportunity to learn English.
Right.
But after 1949, still there are people learn English, but they must be very careful. You can never listen to radio of English language in Western countries, because that was supposed to be enemies radios.
Yes, right.
Like a VOA. VOA, when I was a little child, I heard about the VOA. That's very,
VOA.
mythical thing. If you dare to listen to VOA, it could be arrested. even
Really?
with your family members. Even they don't listen to, but if you listen to, then that means you've got some problem with your family members.
I see. Right.
That's serious. So I remember the first time I did that because my dad did it. I found my dad listening to VOA. That year was I was 10 years old. So I tried to imitate, and my dad told me, never say outside, otherwise we will all be arrested.
Be very careful.
Yeah.
Now you speak excellent English. Is English a very difficult language to learn for Chinese speakers? Because I know for English speakers, Chinese is quite a challenging language to learn. I'm practicing it myself. How easy is it for Chinese speakers to learn English?
Yeah, compared with other foreign language, English is more, not, I can't say easy, but it's comparatively speaking, people like say, oh, that's a language that I can master. At least I can understand it. Compared with a Russian, which is more difficult with grammar change. You know, when what do you see, there are different grammatic rules, and also with Japanese, German, French. So English, so most people concentrate on English learning. So I think that nowadays, even in some rural areas, people can still speak a little English.
Right. Absolutely. Now, I want to touch a little bit more on the different ethnic groups in China. You mentioned there are 56 or 57, 55 different ethnic groups. And the big one is the Han Chinese ethnic group.
Yeah.
So approximately what percentage of the population is Han? I assume you're Han Chinese?
Yeah, sure. I would say at least 95%.
Oh wow, that's fairly high.
Yeah.
And some of the other prominent ones include Zhuang.
Yeah.
Miao.
Yi.
Yi.
Hani. Qiangzu. Manzu. Manzu is for Qing dynasty, the rulers, dictators, all come from Manchu.
I see. And then, of course, way out west, you have in the southwest, in the mountainous region of Tibet, you have a separate ethnic, linguistic, religious group out there that has sort of semi-autonomous place in China. And then in the northwest, you have the province of Xinjiang, which contains the group known as the Uyghurs. Can you tell us a little bit about the Uyghurs?
Yeah, Uyghurs looks much different. They're just like Europeans, white skin, high nose, the yellow hair and blue eyes. They are many live on those cattle, sheep, and other animals.
Right.
So there's still some minorities besides the Uyghurs.
And of course, the Uyghurs are a predominantly Muslim people who speak a Turkish language, which distinguishes them. So maybe one or two more questions here. So tell us a little bit about the climate of China. Does it get very hot and very cold like the United States?
But nowadays, climate is getting worse. People say, especially old people say, when they were young or little children, the climate is so nice. In the summertime, it's not that hot, especially some specific years. In winter time, it's okay; they can bear with that. But nowadays, it's getting so hot and so cold, they cannot bear anymore.
Right.
I mean, the less trees. I mean, we have a lot of forests before, but now disappeared.
Right.
So many land, not only the deserts and the rivers. Some rivers disappeared. Lakes disappeared. So that's very serious.
That's very serious.
Yeah. So I would say if they say 200 years ago, China, the climate or in general, in many ways, is much more like Canada or US. Of course, Canada is more colder.
Of course.
But that means the climate is good. The people like the climate, and they give the 4 seasons quite clear, and also they have the harvest. They have very good life. but there's a lot of wars and a lot of famines.
Yeah.
It's all because the people made these disasters.
Right. And finally, if you're an English-speaking person from the United States or from Australia or Canada or Great Britain or wherever, do you recommend traveling to China? Is it a great place to go visit?
Sure, I think a lot of cities to be visited. Ancient historic cities like Xi'an, Chengdu, many to choose. There are some small towns, small counties. Nowadays, some people, some Westerners, they got more knowledge, so they visit even specific village in China. There are some very famous villages in Jiangsu, Hunan, and many Sichuan. Just this come specific for that village. And food is one great attraction.
Yes, we're going to have to talk about food in the next episode. That's a fascinating subject. Well, thank you, Professor Xia, and thank you for listening to this first episode in our series, What Do You Know About China?
Thank you.